All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jamie Willis-Rose. I'm a technical specialist at Microsoft Federal. And this is the April edition of the Microsoft Federal Business Applications webinar series. Very excited to have you here. Just a couple little tidbits here. We are recording this session. So if you don't want to be recorded, please leave now and we will post the recording in a few days. Our agenda for today, we're going to start with a community overview. Then we're going to get some product updates. And then the headliner, if you will, is Dave Milton's going to be walking us through Power Platform for developers. And then at the end, we'll stop recording and then we'll have open Q&A for the remainder of the session. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but just to reiterate, Microsoft is an inclusive place. We don't tolerate harassment or discrimination. Please be respectful in the chat. Right now, everyone is on mute, but we will open the mics up at the end when we have the Q&A portion. In the meanwhile, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. If you would like to be contacted afterwards, we do have an email list that we can use to send you emails, but you can also opt out of that if you don't want to get emails. And as a point of order, if you see any links on the screen, you can click them. So feel free, if you see any links, you can click them right there on the screen, the way I'm sharing this. Some housekeeping. Again, please use the chat to ask questions. If you want to come off mute, you can raise your hand, and we are going to leave the cameras off, but you can turn your microphone on and you can ask questions. And if you don't want to have your question recorded, please wait until can everybody see the chat? Okay, good. All right. If anybody doesn't see it, try leaving and coming back again. Sometimes that works. So this is this is another edition of the webinar series. We have several past webinar recordings available on our Federal Business Applications repo. We'll post a link to that in the chat. But I encourage you, if you this is your first time here, please consider going back and checking out those recordings. We got some great sessions that we did over the last few months. And you also can find out about future future webinars that we'll be having. We have them once a month. So this is just a brief overview of the Business Applications Productivity Suite. So the animation's all wrong here. Sorry, guys. Hold on. So it's supposed to be like this. Maybe Greg can edit that out. So we come in here, and on the left-hand side of the Business Applications Productivity Suite is the out-of-the-box apps, your Word, your Excel. Everybody knows of those. They're comfortable using those. At the other end of the spectrum, you have your custom development. These are the applications that you hire developers for. They write the code. It's a whole thing. Today, we're focusing on that middle section here in the spectrum. This is where the low-code application development comes in the Power Platform. So we have Power BI, Power Automate, Power Apps, and Power Virtual Agents, which are the 4 pillars of the Power Platform. In addition to that, we also have first-party apps, namely Dynamics 365. And that is the main focus of this webinar series, this sort of central piece here. And so that's what we're focusing on today. For those of you in GCC or GCC High or DoD, this is a map of our current offerings. And again, our data centers do offer geo redundancy. If you can click the link if you'd like to read more about how this works and the differences between the 3 clouds. So now for updates. Number one, if you're not aware of this, there is a message center. It's part of the admin center. Typically, global admins have access to this, but you can also get access to it by asking for the message center reader role. This is a special read-only role that you can get to. So if you're someone who wants to know what's coming to Power Platform or Dynamics, you can request this, and that'll give you access to these announcements as they come out. So you'll find out exactly what's going on. When they are announced, they look something like this. So there's usually 3 parts. There's a summary at the top. Then there is how does it affect me or the users? And then there's what do I need to do? And this is typically aimed at the admins. So if you're an admin, maybe you're a Power Platform admin or a Dynamics admin, this would be steps that you would need to take as a result of this change. One of the things we're happy to announce is that Azure Synapse Link now works in GCC as of today. Very exciting news there. Also, you can do the reverse. You can use Azure Synapse to connect data into Dataverse, and you can use user assigned manage identity. So you can go passwordless. So I'll just talk a little bit about that, but I do encourage you to, if you're interested in this, to click the link here at the bottom of the screen. This talks about how this is helpful for you guys to use and why we recommend it. This is a best practice rather than storing user credentials or anything like that. That's definitely a security risk. Also, users' accounts can be disabled. They can be turned off when people leave the company. Passwords can expire. All these things. So that's why we recommend this method. To get started with creating a user assigned managed identity, you're going to go into Azure, your Azure portal. You're going to select create user assigned managed identity. You're going to then, once it's created, you're going to go back into the Power Platform Admin Center. You're going to go into the environment and the settings, and you're going to click application users. And then you're going to come over here and paste in the object ID that you just created in Azure Active Directory. And that'll be how you'll find it. From there, you can then go back into Azure and actually create the connection in Azure Synapse using that user assigned managed identity. The screen's it's a little small to read, I think, but maybe you guys can see better than I can. But that's just where those credentials are used. As always, we listen to your feedback and helps us make our products better. One of the things that we like to get is your feedback on the connectors. As you may know, we have a lot of connectors available today, but there are many more available in commercial than there are in GCC and GCC High and DoD. So if you find a connector is not available in your tenant, please use this form to request it. And again, I'm not making any promises today, but the product group does listen, and if they get enough people asking for something, that does kind of move it up the ladder in terms of priorities. Another thing to keep in mind is that we keep a PDF of functional parity on business applications updated regularly, and this link will take you to that PDF. Again, the last time it got updated was last month. And this will show you clearly what is available today in the various clouds. So you can, if you're looking for something, you're thinking, I thought this just got announced, is it available yet where I work? You can go here and look and see if it's even available. And if it's not, they may have a timeline as to when it will be available. Lastly, please consider clicking this link and offering us your advice on what you think this webinar series should cover. We really want to know what we can do to make it better. So please consider giving us your ideas. We're also always looking out for people to present. So if you'd like to, get a few minutes to present something here, again, it doesn't have to be a super long presentation, but if you have something like a success story you want to share or anything related to the Power Platform, we encourage you to do that. All right. I know I went really fast there. I apologize. I talk a little fast. I'm from Jersey. It is what it is. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Milton, who is our Power Platform Global Black Belt Director. It's a mouthful. And he's going to take it away talking about Power Platform for developers.
Thanks, Jamie. Hey, everyone. I'm Dave. Like the slide says, I'm the director of our Global Black Belt team, which means that we get to focus on really large and strategic customers across North and South America on their journey to low code. In my background, though, I'm a software developer, or maybe I'll say like I'm a recovering software developer. And I've spent a lot of time writing code, both outside of the platform as well as inside. And so I've got a little bit of time today to talk about what I see, at least, as what the roles for developers are in low code. Really enjoyed one of the slides that Jamie had up before, which I think kind of framed a build versus buy discussion. And I tend to frame it a slightly differently in terms of balance. And a lot of times I think we don't really consider the balance of what we're doing, in our jobs every single day. And certainly as developers, there's really kind of this balance between control and responsibility that we battle with every single day. Normally, we frame this simply as like a buy versus build decision. If you look at it though on this graph, when we buy a solution, and certainly like the Office 365 solutions fit that bill, we have very little control over what those things do. I mean, Microsoft builds those solutions, we maintain them, so we don't, as developers, have really any control over what those solutions do. But we also don't have a ton of responsibility. Like if PowerPoint doesn't work, don't come knocking on my door. There's a product team, right? There's a support channel that kind of handles that. The challenge is that when we make the decision to build, we're doing it in a lot of cases because we want full control over the functionality, full control over the look and feel, full control, end to end over the entire solution. In a lot of cases, though, what we're also doing is taking on full responsibility for that solution. And when we take on too much responsibility over time, ultimately what happens is that our capacity to respond to new things, build new capabilities, that goes down over time. And so, ultimately what we're saying is with low code, for developers, we're allowing you to choose more points on this line. So I don't always need full control over everything. If I can give up a little bit of control, I can also give up a little bit of responsibility. And based on the market and the way that we've got this worldwide developer shortage, we need better ways to scale. So low code can help us do that. And there's just kind of three high level elements of how low code helps in the pro development world. First and foremost, it's allowing developers to really focus on the highest impact tasks. And that happens for a few reasons. One is that maybe it allows more people to participate in the creation of solutions. But also when a pro dev jumps in to build on the low code platform, you're not really responsible for every last little piece. And so you really can focus on the highest impact parts of that solution. Inclusion is certainly something that happens throughout the organization, because again, if we're working together as a team with functional users along with technical users together, again, more people get to participate in the creation of those solutions, and ultimately we build more meaningful and more useful solutions that way. And then finally, there's the element of velocity, which is that if I'm not responsible for every bit of the app or the solution that we're building, I can go faster. Ultimately, it's the combination of these things that allow us to scale. Now, I'm going to get to a demo here in a second to kind of show this in action. But first, I spent all day in meetings with PowerPoints talking about products and business applications and business value and all this sort of stuff. And I felt like, well, with this audience, maybe we can take some liberties. And so I wanted to frame this a little bit differently too. Microsoft recently, maybe a couple of years ago, acquired Bethesda Studios. If you ever played the Fallout games, you may have seen a screen like this, or in other games where you build a character and you kind of get a certain number of points that you can dedicate towards the different attributes of your character. So this is kind of like real life. Like I don't have all day to be an expert in every single thing. I can't be nines across the board as much as I'd like to be. And if we kind of move this away from a video game more into like our development experience, we generally have to spend our time and energy focusing on certain areas. And if we're full stack developers, it's going to spread us a little bit thin. And one thing I'll kind of draw attention to too is that, ultimately the more time we spend on the technology side, we might find ourselves having less experience in the functional domain of what we're trying to solve. And so, in the future, what we're seeing is the organizations want to help everybody participate to help us boost our stats. And so we're doing that through fusion teams. Again, the partnership here is between professional developers, citizen developers, and our IT departments to make sure that all of us are using the tools and the resources that we're used to using. So for a citizen dev, that might be building Canvas apps that maybe they deliver through Teams, and they're leveraging Office. But for professional developers, you could be leveraging Azure services or building your solutions in Visual Studio and using whether it's Azure DevOps or GitHub. But ultimately, we're all working together, and we need ways to build and deliver apps and really overall solutions in a meaningful way. So the example I'm going to use today is how can we combine Power Apps from a citizen development perspective, and then Azure from a pro development perspective to build a solution that allows everyone to contribute their piece of expertise into some type of workflow or outcome. Now, the high level flow here of this scenario is going to be that a professional developer is going to write some type of code, and they're going to publish that as an Azure function. And I'll get to what an Azure function is if you're not familiar with what that is. The pro dev can then take that Azure function and publish it as a custom connector. So anybody who then can use Power Automate or Power Apps can take that connector and make it a part of their own solution. Citizen developer can then take that, whether it's again, Power Apps, Power Automate, whatever it may be, build and extend the solutions using that code. Now, the benefit here is traditionally a pro dev would build their code, write their code, and it would be used in a single application. Or maybe they'd build an API and the 5 other developers in their department might get use out of that API. But here what we're saying is not only can the other pro developers in your department use your API and use your Azure function, but so can the entire rest of the organization. So it multiplies the impact that you have overall. Now, just on a technical note, so if you've not heard of or used Azure Functions, effectively it's a serverless compute resource in Azure. And so I can take code, like for instance, in our example, I'm going to take some C# code, and I can deploy it to Azure and expose it as an API. Now, there's a ton more to it, and there's tons of flexibility options, and you can deploy it, whether it's like in a Windows-based environment or Linux or even in a container. There's tons more that we're not going to cover here today. The good news is that there's tons of capability or documentation out there for Azure Functions. You'll get a little sneak peek, kind of the tip of the iceberg here today in this demo. But the idea that I had for Fusion development scenario on Power Platform with Azure was something that I've dealt with a lot, and I know that this is kind of the federal webinar. So I tried to use some of my experience in my federal days and figure out what was something that was really difficult for people to work with day in and day out, and for me that's PDF forms. I don't know how many folks on the call here have had to deal with this, but government loves forms, and Power Platform comes along and gives us all these great tools to digitize processes and get rid of paper. But the reality is, a lot of government organizations, whether it's federal, state and local, whatever it may be, at the end of the day, they still want their forms. You can't get away from these things. And in Power Platform, I've seen all sorts of janky workarounds where people use Word templates and then use a OneDrive connector to try to convert it to a PDF. But it never comes out right unless you're actually using the form itself. So I've got an example of a form here. We'll pull it up here in a moment. But the point is, you go out and search for PDF forms in government, and I couldn't even fit them all on the screen. There's just tons and tons and tons of them. So here was my idea. I thought, okay, let's use an Azure function, and there's plenty of good libraries out there. So I went out and I used just a well-known package called iText, and I wrote a quick Azure function, which we'll walk through, that can handle PDF forms, and it can read the fields off of the forms. It can fill the fields on the forms. It can flatten the forms if we need it for something else, right? But it can do everything that I need to do with a PDF. And so as a pro dev, I write that C# code, and I deploy that Azure function to do so. Second thing I do is I go in and configure that custom connector. So the Azure function effectively exposes an API. I go into the Power Platform and I configure all of the different messages and actions that I want to expose in a connector. And then I can publish that out into Power Platform environments. Now, the other thing, if you've dealt with Power Apps before, you might have noticed that dealing with files is kind of a pain. So again, as a pro dev, there's another opportunity to amplify your impact, and that is in the UI layer. And so one of the other things we'll do in this example is I go into Power Apps, and as a pro dev, I configure a reusable Canvas component that makes uploading files way easier. Because this example is going to need end users to be able to easily upload a file, call my connector with the contents of that file, and then receive their inputs back. So the pro dev's doing these three things. Now, in our example, the citizen dev or the pro dev could do this piece, which is we want Power Automate flows to be able to use my custom connector to pass PDF files back and forth to our custom connector to the Azure function to either read the fields or fill them out. And then, of course, we need a UI layer for this example too. So we've got a Power App. So this is the end-to-end scenario that we'll be running through today. Now, step one, of course, Azure Functions. And again, I'm assuming that maybe some folks on the call haven't seen these or worked with them before. So this is going to go through a quick recording of me actually creating one. So I'm in Visual Studio, and you can create a new project. You search for functions. You might have to install some of the packages in Visual Studio if you haven't done this before, but it's pretty straightforward. You give your project a name, got a couple of default options here, and then I'm choosing an HTTP trigger with OpenAPI. So that's allowing me to create this Azure function that will effectively, it's functioned like an API. And you'll notice here gives you kind of some default code that comes along with it. I got a function name. I've got all my OpenAPI metadata here, but effectively that's all you need to do to get started. Now, the next step of this is to write the code, and I'm just going to fast forward through here. This is the typical stuff you do as a developer. You go look up the APIs, you add your packages, your dependencies. But a few moments later, what I effectively have here, this is one function to read the PDF form fields, and you can see the entirety of this code. Even take this logging stuff out. Like, this is pretty much it. Now, I am using a helper library, just like any dev might do. So all of this stuff should feel very comfortable if you've been using Visual Studio to write C# code, .NET code for really anything. But this is effectively it. We're taking the PDF in as the body of the request. We are, in this case, reading all the fields, and then we're returning them back in a formatted way. So we're using JSON to format this and return it. Once we build this, then there are options to publish and deploy. So again, if you have an Azure subscription, you're going to need one for this. You can choose to publish this code as your Azure function out to a particular resource group. You can choose your region, all that good stuff. And I've kind of fast forwarded through some of this, but it's just an easy to use wizard. And now what I have is my code running in the cloud, serverless, no infrastructure, as an API. So you go through this, and now that I've set this profile up for publishing, I can go back and make changes to my function and just simply hit publish, and it'll all push it out for me. So this part, it's cloud native, but it's not scary. It's very simple to get set up and start using. So for this example, we've gone ahead and done that. We've published, it succeeded, and we're ready to go. In the Azure portal, you'll find your function there, and you'll see that it gives you a URL. So you've got that there, and you're going to use this to connect. You'll also notice there's a bunch of keys. Now, you can have function keys or app keys. Taking the lazy way, using an app key. I already deleted this key, so if you try to use it, it's not going to work. So don't try to be cute here. But I take this code, and we can use this to connect to my API. Now, there's a lot more options to this. So if you wanted to put API management in front of this, or put more infrastructure to protect your APIs, you can certainly do that. That was out of scope for this little example here, but this is what we've done. We've set this all up, and now we want to test it. So I use Postman. You can use all sorts of different tools. You can even test from some tools available for Azure Functions specifically. But here, what I'm doing is testing out a post. I put the little key there in the URL for the query string as a parameter. And then for the body, I'm simply passing the PDF form. And so I've got a form that I'm going to use. I made sure the body is set to binary. I select the file. I pass that up, send it off. And then what I get back is my formatted list of field names and field values. Now, this form, I think, was mostly blank, so that's why you don't see a whole lot of field values here. But in a minute, we're going to run this with some actual data, and we're going to see that come back. But this lets me know that, okay, in general, this API is working. So now would be a good time to go ahead and configure a custom connector. Now, this piece really is configuration. There's really no code to this part of it. I go into, whether it's the Power Apps or Power Automate Maker portal, you can go to custom connectors, and I'm going to create one from blank. There's other options as well. But just to show you the hardest possible way that this could possibly be done is I go in, I give it the base URL of my host, which we got from the Azure portal just a minute ago. For security, we're going to tell it to use my API key. And so you've got some options there. You can use OAuth if it's something more complex, but I give it the key, tell it what the parameter name is going to be, and that it's going to show up on the query string. And then I just need to go in and define all of the actions that I want for this connector. So I want one that's going to read the PDF form fields. And later on in my example, I'll show you I've done more actions as well for filling the PDF, flattening the PDF, all sorts of other things. But I'm going to tell it that we want this action to do a post to that URL. And then because I want binary, you just put double quotes there. Just leave it blank with two double quotes. And then I can go into the body and change the format of the key body output to make sure that it expects binary. So that's pretty much it. I've done this. There are other options to define the format of the response, and then there's more advanced things like policies that you can go look into. But this one's pretty simple. I go ahead, create the connector, we save it, and we're pretty much ready to go. So in this case, if I wanted to go the extra mile, as a pro dev, I could go ahead and write some flows that my end users could reuse as well. So these flows are going to call that custom connector, and they're going to implement the actions that we've defined. So again, we're just going to show a really simple example here. But the idea is that the Power App is going to provide us a file, so the uploaded file. Don't even really need the second action here. I use it because if you look at the way that parameters are named in Power Apps, they're named based on the name of the action that you're using them in. So I always create a compose action with the name that I want, then define the parameter. But then this is it. My custom connector is right here, and all it needs is the body. So in some cases, like here, we're using the base 64 to binary expression. Just to translate the base 64 that the Power App's going to upload into binary. Because if you remember, our custom our API needs a binary body. So really simple. It's one expression, and we're done. So this is really simple too. Like everything we've done so far has been able to fit on a single screen of a reasonable resolution. So this is all pretty straightforward. Now, like I mentioned, if you've ever built Canvas apps and you've had to deal with files, that can be a little bit tricky. So step 4, there we go, is building a Canvas component. Now this admittedly is a little hacky, but you've probably seen these examples all over the internet before. I'm going to create a component library. So this allows me to build UI components that are reusable. And I'm going to go in real quick and add a SharePoint data source. And I'm not actually going to use it, but you'll see in a minute, the reason I do this is because SharePoint and Dataverse are kind of the two data sources that natively have support for attachments in Canvas app. So by adding that data source, just temporarily pointed at any SharePoint list you've got access to, I can then insert a form, tie the form to SharePoint, and then all of a sudden I get the option for attachments. But I'm going to throw everything else away. So you'll notice I get rid of all the other fields. I dive into the form. I grab the one control that represents the attachment upload, and I paste it into my custom component. And I got to go clear some error messages out, and I kind of fast forward through some of that. But basically, I just delete any function that has an error for now. So I'm really just left with this attachment control. Now from here, I do insert an image just to make my life a little bit simpler, and I set the image equal to the first attachment that's attached. And then what I'm able to do, again, this is the pro dev doing this for reuse, so we don't ever have to do this part again. But what we do is that every time an attachment is added to the attachment control, we're going to set some local variables to take the contents of that attachment and make sure that we translate them to base 64. So I'll pause this here just so you can kind of get a quick look at what I've done here. But basically, we're taking the image, we're taking that data, putting it into that first variable, and then kind of stripping out some of the extra bits on the base 64 string just so that I can get just the string itself for the contents of the file. So this is the type of stuff that you don't really want everybody in the organization having to do. And you can see how for a citizen dev, this could be pretty complicated. So the value here is that by building this reusable component, I've taken on the burden as the pro dev who understands some of this of how to make this really simple to use. The last bit is that I just need an output property for my component, and I'll just call this the file contents. So this is the only thing the citizen devs need to do is make sure if they ever need the file contents, they simply use this output property. And you'll notice that I just set the value of it equal to the variable that we manipulated just a second ago. So, even all of this, having done this a couple of times, this took about, 5 minutes to get done. But now, again, I can deploy this out, share that component library with everybody else. So the last step now is the Canvas app. So here's where a citizen dev is going to get involved and have to use all this stuff. And I'll show you how we've really made this much simpler for everybody. So let's go in and create the Canvas app. So I go in, give it a name. I'll use a tablet format. And what'll happen now is I'm going to go add the control, get more components, and I'll see the component library. So I can go import that to my app. I'll get the file uploader. Now I've taken a little bit of time to make it look nicer too. So you'll notice when I add the file uploader, it's got a little nice drop shadow to it and a formatted button. But as the citizen dev, you just simply drop this on here. And now you're ready to do something with these files. So we're going to insert a button, and that button will be the one that calls my Power Automate flow. So I'll give it a nice label. And then all I need to do is go to Action, Power Automate, and I can add a flow from the environment that I'm in. So we'll go through and do that. And I've got my saved flow from before for the read PDF form, and it takes one parameter, which is the file contents. So what I'll be able to do now with that button is use the name of that flow. So, and I'm actually going to do a clear collect. So we're going to take the output of my flow and store it. So we're going to store the output in my PDF form field results, and then we're calling that flow. Now, again, this isn't going to be for every citizen developer, but this is pretty simple. The inputs that we need, I'm just going to refer to my file uploader.filecontents, and we're done. So that made file manipulation really easy for the citizen dev. Now, the last thing we'll do is just put a gallery on the form so we can see what came back. So we're going to send our PDF form up to the Azure function. It's going to read all the stuff for us. It's going to send it back, and then we're going to put the results in a collection. So what we'll do here is just put a label for the field name, and then I'll use a text box for the field value. Now, it's not going to look exactly right, so I'm going to have to make a few adjustments here. But what you'll see is that once I've mapped this stuff out, I can then run the app. We can attach a file. I'll just grab one here. It's a filled form. I click read form. It sends the PDF to the Azure function, runs it, gives me the response back, and then we populate the gallery. And yeah, it's pretty ugly, so we got to make it look a little bit nicer. But you'll notice here that it gives me all the data I need. And some of these fields were in fact filled out, and you can see them all right here. So from here, you can really go much further, right? So now I could easily write a flow that updates the fields and calls the other actions. And we can go much further from it. And in fact, what I'll do now is kind of show you now that I've spent a little bit more time, what a citizen dev could do. So let's use this PDF generator and we'll just play it. So you can see I've taken that same app and we've tossed a few more components on here. So I've made the buttons look a little bit nicer. I've given more options to generate a form, save a form, read the fields, and we have a PDF viewer here. So if we look, for example, like here, I'll show you this. This is a typical form that we have to deal with. So I just went out and grabbed a US government standard form 50. And it's got like 5 pages with the same fields on it. So you notice it repeats a lot of the stuff on here. What's nice though is that we can read this and we can regenerate it with the right format. So let me show you that. We'll click attach file. I think it's this one here with the with data. We'll read the field. So this part you've already seen. This won't be much of a surprise. But again, as a citizen dev, you can build a really nice experience with this. So once I've sent those fields off, let's say I wanted to change the name. And so I've got a little field search here so I can search for name. And of course it had 5 pages with 5 fields on it. So let's just change this to that. And now I can actually generate the form. So this button is calling another flow, which is calling another function, which is filling that field out. And you'll notice here, the PDF viewer now loads it up. and I've got that form filled out. And in fact, while the PDF viewer doesn't really show you that this is still a form, this is still an editable form. So if I click Save Form, we basically dump it out to OneDrive. We can download this, and when I open it, you'll notice it's still an editable form. So, all in all, like end to end, building this little scenario here probably took me the better part of like 3 hours. Right. And I mean, granted, like I've lived in this world for a while, I have some experience with PDF manipulation. But if you think of all the different use cases that require some type of, PDF form manipulation, or, think of other scenarios as well. It doesn't just have to be for PDFs, right? It could be for anything that's difficult to work with inside your organization. As developers, we generally get kind of pigeonholed in building very specific solutions that solve one problem at a time. And when we're asked to do things that are maybe more generic, we're really just doing them for other developers. And so our impact is really reliant on other people, wanting to reuse our code. And I don't want to make any, strong generalizations, but sometimes devs want to build the stuff themselves. When we change our focus, though, and build reusable components, build custom connectors for people who are passionate about solving problems. So citizen developers who are close to the problems inside their organizations, I think you'll get outcomes like this, where like now I can pretty much take, provided it's a non-password protected PDF and it's unlocked, you can use this type of solution with nearly any type of form you might have, and then tack on your own workflows as well. So, I mean, ultimately, it wasn't terribly complicated to put this together, but we can get a ton of reuse out of it. Now, we covered a lot of things, and I've got more to show even, because there's another element to this whole idea, which is that we then want to be able to automate the deployment of these types of solutions, package these things up, have CI, CD, ALM. There's a lot more to it. And I'm going to get to some of that here in a moment. But before I forget, there's just a few resources I figured I'd toss out there, and we'll share this as well. I think some folks might have put it in the chat already, but we've got a good ebook on Fusion development. It's here at the bottom. We even have a learning path. So just like we've got learning paths for the individual parts and technologies here. So there's one for Azure Functions if you want to learn more about that. There's certainly some for Power Apps, Power Automate, the entire Power Platform. But we now have one on Fusion development as well. And then, of course, there's a ton of pro developer content out there, too, if you want to get deeper and even add some more features like API management on top of your functions. But getting back to the ALM example, so Steve, who normally I think hosts a lot of these, Steve Winward's put together a couple of examples, been playing around with GitHub Actions with Power Platform to help automate the process of making changes to your apps and then pushing those out to different environments. And again, if you're familiar with Power Platform, you probably have some type of setup like this where you've got multiple environments, maybe dev, build, and prod. And each environment is effectively a container for your apps, your flows, and a Dataverse environment. So the idea is that we want to allow developers to update their Power Platform solution in their own dev environment. But then we want them to be able to take all of that solution and export it as source code. Now, when you saw me going through the Power Apps portion before, that was all kind of through the browser, and all the source code for the Canvas app and the components and everything has been obscured for me, but it does in fact exist. And we've got actions that allow you to export your entire solution as source code, create a dev branch, in this case in GitHub. And then once we do a pull request, we can then merge those changes if they're approved into our main branch. The part that Steve's taken on to automate, and this is what we'll share with you here in a moment, is that you can use GitHub Actions to automatically deploy your solution to a build environment, then export it as a managed solution, then automatically deploy it into production environment. And so this can make a lot of those manual tasks or things that have historically been manual happen automatically. So Steve's posted this. This is a GitHub down here at the bottom. I think he'll have a link to it on the federal BizApps GitHub later, so you can easily get there if you already know how to get to our other one here. And he'll have all the samples available. But there's a quick recording of him going through this. And so, at the beginning, this is really pretty simple, just like we saw before. We're going to have a Canvas app. His is a little bit simpler, but I'm not gonna throw stones here. He's got a label. hello world, and then he'll make a change to his app. So he'll add a second label. And we want to make sure that we automatically deploy these changes. So he's made his first GitHub action updates. It's got that, there you go, nice formatting there. So now this looks beautiful. And we're ready to deploy these changes. So he'll save here. Got this ready. We're going to publish. And again, this is in his development environment. You can see that at the top of the screen. And so now the next step is actually in GitHub. And so he's got in his own repo here an action that will export and branch the solution. And so this is the template that he'll be sharing, and you guys will be able to take this and make your own copies of it as well. But it's going to go through here and automatically take the changes. And I know it's going by too fast to kind of see what's happening, but it's effectively exporting that all as source code and then as an unmanaged solution. So we'll go back in here. We'll see the branch. He's going to make a pull request. He'll leave his comment to let everyone know the changes that he's made. Add a new title. All right, so create the pull request. Squash and merge. We'll confirm. And then what we'll see is the ability to draft the release. So give the release a title. Also going to tag it. It's an automated release. And then we'll be able to publish this. So if you're used to working in GitHub, effectively what this is going to do is make working in the Power Platform a lot more native to your workflows and what you're used to doing. Now, you'll see that he's got a couple of different actions in here, and these scripts are marked as reusable because generally you might need several copies of them, one for each developer or one for each app or environment that you have. But they're all fairly simple to take and make your own. And then you can see here in the production environment, we've got the app deployed. So this is just a preview. There will be follow-up and deeper sessions on this. And like I said, he'll have the sample GitHub scripts all posted, or at least a link to them on the federal side. But with that, I know we've got about 15 minutes left. I'll pause here. And Craig, Jamie, if you guys want to open it up for questions or if you've got any wrap-up, we'll pass it to you.
That was awesome. Thank you, Dave. Really do appreciate it. Yeah, let me see if I can take over presenting. Sec here. All right. Wait 1 sec here. Just gonna zip to the end. So thanks again, Dave. As a reminder, we have a monthly webinar every month. So next month it's going to be in May. We don't have the exact date yet or the topic, but we will. And we will announce that. We typically announce that on social media if you are on LinkedIn or Twitter. But we also, if you signed up for email blast, you'll get an email announcing it when it is determined.